Hello, everyone. My name is Chris Horner. I am a cybersecurity engineer with Triaxiom Security, which is a consultancy based in Charlotte. Now, as a pen tester, part of my job is to run social engineering exercises for our clients. And to be successful at that, I look for information that I can use that will make my communication during those engagements appear to be more authentic, and they can be used to create further attack vectors. Now, these are the same tactics that a bad actor will use in order to gain personal information on their targets as well. So it's important to be aware of these tactics and how they work so we can protect ourselves and our loved ones when being online. So this presentation is not to scare anyone. I don't believe in scare tactics. I don't think they work. What I do believe in, though, is to be aware so that we can all make calculated choices about what we want to allow to be disclosed about us that can ultimately affect our lives. Think of it as our own personal risk model, if you will. So today we're going to cover four key things. We're going to cover OSINT. We're going to look at what people can see about us online. How do people find all of this out? But most importantly, how we can take back a measure of control of this information too. So let's start with OSINT. OSINT stands for Open Source Intelligence. This just means publicly available information where no hacking is required to access it. Now, this information is collected and analyzed piece by piece. Information from multiple sites is pieced together to craft even more specific searches. Think of it like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. Now, if you have one piece of a puzzle, each piece on its own means little. But when you start putting these pieces together, the picture starts to become clear. And each piece that you put in place gives clues as to where other pieces fit into the puzzle. Eventually, you have a complete picture. That's basically the process of collecting OSINT information. So how do people find out this information? Well, it literally just starts with the web browser. The first thing people will probably look at is a person's social media profiles and their posts. Everybody likes talking about their interests, but do the conversations give hints to things like passwords, for example? Family names, hobbies, things of that sort. Does the person have a cute and unique username that they think is really clever and that they're proud of and they use it everywhere? That's awesome. Just also understand something like that can make it even easier to narrow down search results and uncover even more personal information. Now, 90% of the information that's on the internet is part of the deep web. Deep web, of course, is different than the dark web. Deep web just means it is not indexed by search engines, but that does not mean the information isn't accessible when you know where to look. So places like the Wayback Machine or public databases contain all sorts of information. One of my favorite examples of this is county or state tax records. If you know approximately where somebody lives, you can search for their property tax records. Could be car, could be real estate, depends. But this can uncover all sorts of information. Recorded documents like deeds, license plates, what type of car they drive, their mortgage information. All of this can be sitting out there in the public domain. It varies again depending on the locale, but it can be alarming to see all of what is actually available. So some other types of information that people might be able to find out are addresses, current and previous, phone numbers, email addresses, even that AOL one that you forgot about 20 years ago, social media profiles, dates of birth, maiden names, relatives, neighbors, political affiliation, online reviews. Now that's a really interesting one because people love to give their opinion, right? Just also understand that gives insight into places that they frequent and other interests that they have. It can also let people know what kind of items that you own. If you have something valuable or rare and you're talking about it on an internet forum or a Facebook group, that can be combined with this other information that we just talked about, and you can kind of see where that could go. Now, this applies to business information too. On one pen test, we had a repeat client that wanted something different this time. I was able to figure out what kind of HR software the company was using. And how did I do that? Well, I was looking for our client's logo. And one of the logos led back to this HR company's site. The reason it did is because our client had put a testimonial in place for that HR software company talking about how happy they were with the software. Well, that became a social engineering campaign. So I created a fake portal that looked like a login for this HR company. Spoiler alert, it worked. It worked really well. It worked because the employees saw something that they were already familiar with, and they were happy to log in to make sure that their account would transfer successfully to the upgraded system, because of course nobody wants their payroll disrupted. So when I was putting this presentation together, it occurred to me, of course, it's best to show, not tell, right? So I picked on some poor unfortunate soul that has the misfortune of sharing the same name as me. And this is what I was able to uncover about them: their age, their phone number, their email, social media profiles that belong to them, physical addresses, both current and previous, their relatives, even the name of their neighbors. Now, even taking this a step further, I was even able to find out how long he's lived at his house, what the approximate home value was, even his income, and aliases that he might have gone by before. Even on the other slides, you might have noticed that some of the information was already redacted. It said that it had to be unlocked. But once you figured out that you're onto the right person, you can go. The information is usually stored in multiple places, multiple sites, multiple aggregators. By comparing what you find on other sites with the information that you find on this one, for example, you can start to piece together different things, because they don't always redact the same information. So you can find one half of something and then another half. Now, here's the other crazy thing about this, and I am not exaggerating when I say this. When I found all of this information, it took me less than 10 minutes. It actually, and I mean literally, took me longer to redact all of these slides and put them into this presentation than it did to uncover this poor dude's information. Now, here is why all of this matters. Think about all of this information that we just looked at and put it in the context of, have you ever had to answer password reset questions? Think about what a lot of those common questions are, and a lot of those answers can be found in people's social media posts. Have you ever had to prove who you are to a credit bureau? Credit bureau especially. They will ask about previous addresses and even mortgage information to prove who you are. Stalkers, not to be sexist, but this can disproportionately affect women. This is the part of the presentation where I say, I'm very glad that this gets recorded, because I have teenage daughters who I care deeply about. So anybody who thinks about asking them out, I hope they take note of the speech, understand who I am and what I can do, because I am that dad. But joking aside, it's not just women that experience this. I personally experienced this at one point, and even though in my case it was more annoying than anything else, I completely understand many times it is a far more serious and even sometimes deadly experience for others, sadly. So it is not a light subject. Then there's bad actors tend to go for easy targets. The more information that's out there about somebody that they've got a fix on, the easier time they're going to have. Conversely, if they get frustrated because they can't figure anything out about this person, they'll move on to an easier target, of which, unfortunately, there are plenty. Finally, there is, did you agree to let all these sites aggregate your information in the first place? Well, spoiler alert, we kind of did, and we'll talk about that in a second. But once we understand that this information is out there and how it got out there, a lot of us probably would have made some different choices along the way. A sentiment that I hear frequently expressed is, well, if somebody wants to know all of that information about me, it says more about them than it does about me. And it can be common to feel that way, because most of us don't have anything to hide. Now, this particular still that's on this slide, this is from a movie called Anon, and it's this clip was shared with me at one point. It's about living in a super surveillance state where everything is recorded and accessible. Now, Amanda Seyfried's character here, she's actually learned how to disrupt the system and the algorithm, and she's not only figured out how to erase memories, but also how to stay invisible from the system in the first place. Clive Owen plays opposite of her. He's a cop. He asked her why it's so important to stay invisible, and this was her answer here. It's not that I have anything to hide. I have nothing that I want you to see. And that's really the point, isn't it? This doesn't mean you have to live like a prepper or a recluse, unless that's what you want to do. It doesn't mean hiding from everyone and never doing anything online, or being a paranoid conspiracy theory junkie, or staying off social media completely. The whole point, again, like was mentioned at the beginning of this, is awareness. The point is to be aware that this information is online, and then you can decide what your comfort level is with that. Now, before we talk about taking back control of this information, it's important to spend a moment to understand how this even became a thing in the first place. We're probably all familiar with the saying that if you're not paying for the product, then you are the product. So this information was collected together from numerous different sources. It was collected from rewards programs that we signed up for companies or stores that we frequent. Information came from social media posts. It was scraped from there, games we might have played, mailing lists that we're on, even the background data that our mobile apps leak, web browsing history, the cookies that are contained in there, our credit card transactions, online surveys we might have filled out, public records like we've already talked about. Now this information is collected by data brokers. It's all collected together and then sliced and diced up in about 87,000 different ways. It's then sold off to the highest bidder over and over and over and over and over again. So we did this to ourselves. We voluntarily gave up this information and agreed to let it be used because we didn't read the terms of service and things we're signing up for. We just want to save 40 cents on a loaf of bread that day. And all of that data collection is legal. About a year ago, John Oliver on his show Last Week Tonight did a deep dive into the data broker industry and exactly how it worked. 20 minutes long, it's available on YouTube. It's really good to kind of get a better idea of how all this works. And then of course, in true John Oliver fashion, at the very end, he does something hysterical with it, which I won't spoil. So now that we know all of this is out there, the next logical question is, well, how do I get rid of this information? Well, the first step would be to Google yourself and see what sites your information is showing up on. If it's a site you don't want your information on, they will typically have an opt-out page. Now, they do not make this easy to find. A lot of times I had to Google the site's name as well as opt-out page in order to find that link. Because whenever you're asking for your information to be removed from there, now you're messing with their money. And of course, they don't like that. A lot of these services too will require a reason why you're asking to have your information removed. Now, some examples of reasons that they will accept is you work in law enforcement, for example, and so you're concerned about retaliation. Or if you've been the victim of stalking or harassment, that can be valid as well. Or the unfortunate victim of identity theft. Now, when I went through this process for myself, I tended to use stalking and identity theft. And at least in my case, I was never asked to actually prove it. If you have any qualms about stretching the truth in case none of these scenarios apply to you, just remember that Equifax lost control of all of our information and put us all at risk for identity theft. So thank you, Equifax. Now, this is a very tedious process and it requires a lot of vigilance. If you go through and do it manually, it can take months, depending on how long you've been live and how much information is out there. And it isn't enough to do it just once. I usually recommend checking a couple times a year because new services can pop up that didn't exist before when you did it, or something may have been reactivated through a terms of service that you agreed to. So it's important to check a couple times a year to stay on top of it. And then finally, there's information leaked by our mobile apps. So when you're enabling an app on your device, actually look at the permissions that it's asking about, especially location tracking. Do those apps need as many permissions as they want you to believe to function right? I'll bet you they don't. So here's where you can have a little bit of fun with things. Now that you know what kind of information is out there and how it's collected, why not mess around with it? If you want to sign up for a certain rewards program, do they really need to know your actual date of birth? And do they really need to know your actual phone number? Are they going to check it? Probably not. So put misinformation out there intentionally and keep it out there. Personally, I like using April Fool's and August 29th, 1997 as my birthday. If you know why the August date is significant, congratulations. It means you're as nerdy as me. I've also altered the year of my birth in a couple decades in either direction. I do know that it works because every once in a while I get an ad for AARP in the mail, which I think is hilarious because I am not near that age. But it can work. So you can start taking back a measure of control of this information, make it harder to pinpoint you down, and you can start spinning the narrative back in your favor. So does all of this actually work? Yeah, it does. And here's how I know. Personal story. I didn't always live in North Carolina. I moved here from another state. And so growing up, I had some dear friends, and they had a milestone wedding anniversary coming up. And a friend of theirs knew that I was a good friend to them and was planning a surprise party and wanted to invite me. So she spent months, and I mean that literally, months, contacting all the Chris Horners in North Carolina, trying to track me down so she could invite me to this party. She was using all the methods that we talked about before, looking at public databases, trying to find me on social media, which I'm barely there anyway, and wasn't able to find me. She finally had to break down and ask the husband and the couple, okay, look, how do I get a hold of this guy? So, and why she needed the information. So once she got a hold of me, she told me the story, and I thought it was kind of cool that, yeah, this can actually work. Now, she wanted to use it for a good case scenario, but if somebody has malicious intentions, maybe you can kind of start to see how this could come in handy. So up to now, even with all that we've covered, we've just barely scratched the surface of this topic. Now we'll look at some resources if you find this really interesting and want to do a deeper dive. First, though, the standard issue disclaimer: neither myself or CarolinaCon or my employer, Triaxiom Security, care if you use these resources or not. There are numerous resources out there. These are just samples of ones that I found beneficial, but nobody here cares or benefits if you use them. So the first one I want to bring up is Heath Adams of TCM Security, more commonly known as a cyber mentor. He's got an entire course on OSINT. It's about 4.5 hours long. It's free. It's on his YouTube channel. And within the channel too, he has other shorter videos that discuss OSINT, how to look up information, and then he even has some challenges you can participate in to kind of test your skills on it too. Next up is Michael Bizzell. He runs a website called inteltechniques.com. He also has a book called Extreme Privacy. Now this dude, he treats this topic like blood sport. Part of the free resources he offers is a list of the sites that aggregate the information, you know, where we looked at earlier, where I found all that information about the other person with the same name as me. But you can actually print this out and use it as a checklist to go through and check these sites yourself to see if the information is out there. That book, Extreme Privacy, What It Takes to Disappear, it's excellent. He gets extremely deep. How to disappear yet live in plain sight and enjoy a normal life. He covers burner phones, prepaid cards, even hiding real estate ownership from prying eyes. Not tax people, not the government, but people that don't have a reason to know. His clients tend to be super high profile individuals, and this book is basically the playbook he uses to keep them anonymous. He also added another book as well, all about creating a private mobile device. Very good information, excellent resource to look at. There's also joindeleteme.com. Now this is a paid service, and again, I must stress, there is no affiliation to myself or CarolinaCon or my employer. One of the very first versions I gave of this presentation was delivered to the meetup group Queen City Security, and a member of that group was the one who actually told me about this service, and they seem very happy with it. They use it. And other conversations I've had with people in the meantime, they seem to be very happy with it too. What DeleteMe does is it automates the deletion of this information from these aggregate sites, and it takes the tediousness out of the process. That said, their website is a great resource, and they offer advice on doing it yourself. They even offer a do-it-yourself opt-out guide, and that part is completely free to use. So because of that, I've chosen to include them here as well. Now, if you really get into this subject and you want to try your hand out at it without being branded as a stalker, and do a little bit of good in the community, check out Tracelabs.org. Their mission is to reunite missing persons with their loved ones, and they offer training to level up your OSINT skills. So if you want to try your hand out at it, check this out. This is a good legal way to do it. And that's what I have for you today. So I really appreciate your time and attention today. And remember, while most of us here are already interested in maintaining security and privacy, I do hope that you found some valuable takeaways that you can use for your personal situation and those of your loved ones. Most of the people in our circles, they're not even aware that all of this goes on behind the scenes. And as security professionals, we're known in our respective circles as the experts. And I always say it takes a village. So it's important that we look out for our families and our friends to help them stay safe online and make good decisions there. I'm always happy to connect with other professionals. I can be found on LinkedIn under Chris M. Horner. My conversation and posts there tend to revolve around cybersecurity, OSINT, and sports cards that I can't afford. So happy to connect with you. Again, I do thank you, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.